In today's show, Damian Lillard is back. But what does that mean for the Blazers backcourt of the future? We're talking Scoot, Dame, and Jrue, and what it means for that whole trio. Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter, Mike Richmond. You're listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. Thanks for making this show your first listen, coming at you each and every weekday, Monday through Friday. So make it a part of your daily routine. Make it your first listen. Tell your friends to do the same. It's Locked On Blazers, your team every day. In today's show, I want to talk about a topic that is admittedly very far down the line. We're talking 15 months away, but it is something that many listeners and many fans of the Trailblazers are already thinking about, worrying about, fretting about, or getting excited about, depending on who you are. It is, how will Damian Lillard fit into the plan once he's back and playing again? First and foremost, though, let's talk about that timeline. It is indeed 15 months away. We're talking October of 2026 because Damian Lillard is not going to play this season. So everything I am about to say in this episode is indeed speculation based on a read way out into the future. Let's get that caveat out of the way. But that's what we're going to do in today's show. We're going to discuss what bringing Damian Lillard into the fold means for Dame, what it means for Scoot Henderson, and sort of as a byproduct, what it means for the other veteran guard that they already added to the roster this summer in Jrue Holiday. And I also want to add this caveat here, because we're going to discuss it from many. I'm going to do my best to discuss it from all the angles I possibly can. But I'm also not talking about what I believe the Blazers should do. Like, that's not what I'm sharing here. That'll be for another time, and it'll probably be like when it's actually going to happen. What I want to talk about is this is, speculation that is largely unnecessary, but I'm talking about what I think they will do. What they will do 15 months from now. And again, this is 15 months from now. And it spurns from a couple places. Mostly that this has been a thing that has been on a surprising number of listeners' minds. When Damian Lillard chose to re-sign with the Trailblazers, I got many emails. I think I got 35 or something in the first few hours that he signed. Everyone was excited and they're sending me emails, and I appreciate it. LockedOnBlazersPod@gmail.com. I think I've responded to nearly all of them. But I would say the majority of them were excited. Oh, this is awesome. Great news. So cool. Can't wait. Renewed interest. Dame was my favorite Blazer. He's back. I don't care what this means. I just know that it's like a joyous moment. All of the sort of fan positive reactions you could think of. And then roughly like a third of the emails were somewhere between tepid or worse on Damian Lillard's return. And many of those were about how Dame fits into the plan. A funny thing is, everyone who had a tepid or worse response, some people were like, this is bad, or being like, I'm a little bit foggy on this one. Everyone was like, I'm probably the only person that thinks this, but no, you have, I would say, total, this is obviously completely anecdotal, but of the 50-ish emails I received on the topic, a third of those were like, I don't really get it. Or some of them outright, I don't like it. And the questions were largely about who plays and when. The questions range from what does this mean for Scoot Henderson to, well, they have to trade Jrue Holiday now, to maybe the more glowing ones, like Dame is the most mature and wonderful man on earth, and of course he will do what's right for the greater good of the franchise, and to suggest otherwise is an attack on the city of Portland, the greater state of Oregon, all of the Pacific Northwest, and yes, this fan's personal psyche. My read, Mike Richmond's read, is that he's Damian Lillard. He's returned to his kingdom to be king, and the Blazers are going to treat him like Damian Lillard, Trailblazers icon, up until the point that it's obvious he is no longer that player, Damian Lillard, Trailblazers icon, and that he is a new version of Damian Lillard, Trailblazers icon. And even once he hits that version, I imagine they will go a little bit beyond that out of respect to him, Damian Lillard, Trailblazers icon. And I mentioned this right when Dame became a free agent. I said, yeah, and to me, again, this is personal opinion, to me, now's not the time to bring Dame back. I understand why everyone wants to, but like for me, I thought it clouded the overall outlook, because not just because like I am like itching for like Scoot Henderson to play 34 minutes a night, but because they had created a space where there was just going to be clarity of evaluation, a clean evaluation process. And Damian Lillard's not playing this year. They will still have that clean runway to be clear, but it does like, there is this cloud of the most important trailblazer of the 21st century. I mean, the most important trailblazer since 1995. That's when Clyde left. The most important trailblazer, you know, of the last 30 years is back, and he's over there, and he's going to play a little bit, and like he might play a lot of it. So a few reasons for like my read on the situation. I see Dame as the king returning to his kingdom. First, Dame has always had a great deal of power within the organization, and rightfully so, to some extent, but also undeniably, he's had a great deal of power. You will recall the first ever move that Joe Cronin made when he got the interim tag as the interim GM. The first ever move he made as the interim GM was to sign Damian Lillard's cousin to a 10-day contract. You think that came out of nowhere? You think they were scouting Kelvin Blevins? Or you think that Damian Lillard said, oh, new guy's in charge? Here you go, new guy. This is what you can do for me. Like, I don't necessarily think that's detrimental, but it is an indication of the amount of sway that Dame had within the organization. And I don't think that has largely changed. Secondly, like, to the extent that like Dame is the king in his kingdom, he signed the biggest contract likely available to him in free agency. I don't think another team was going to go beyond 3 years, and he got a 2+1, so he even has a little more team control. When that 2+1 means he has a player option on the last year, so he has a little bit of control. He has a no trade clause. I don't think the no trade clause is particularly detrimental, but it is a sign like, hey, I know last time we traded you and it ended weird. Like, let's just make sure that that's not even an option. Let's take that off the table. It's a sign of respect. Players should do this. I'm extremely pro bag getting, and I think players should take every inch that an organization is willing to give you. But I think what this is indicator is how much the players were willing to give you. Dame, because of when Dame entered the free agent market, there wasn't cap space available to him. The most money that he could have possibly earned was the full non-taxpayer mid-level exception. And the Blazers gave him every dollar that they could have of the full non-taxpayer mid-level exception. I'm not saying that is, you know, wrong or bad or whatever, but it is like factually the biggest possible contract based on when he hit the market that he possibly could have earned. And he got it from the Portland Trail Blazers. A sign of respect, a sign of him still being like a powerful person within the organization. They're treating him like Damian Lillard, franchise icon. I would say, like, I'm not saying like Dame has to come play for the minimum to show the blah, blah, like that's not what I think. But I would say it's saying, hi, yes, I will take gigantic contract is not exactly the sign of, it's not like the early signs of a man committing to the like deep personal sacrifice. I don't know that Dame owes this team deep personal sacrifice. Like, I think there's a world, I don't know if he could have gotten this exact contract anywhere else. I think in terms of years, the Blazers are factually, based on the rules, the only team that could have given him a no trade clause. But in terms of years and size of the contract, this was as big as he was going to get anywhere else, and he got it anywhere else. And to hear Damian Lillard tell it as an introductory press conference, you better believe that he thinks he's going to come back as Damian Lillard. He says he anticipates a return to form. Of course he does. He is deeply, deeply optimistic. He is fiercely defiant of the odds. Like, it's how he has gone the way he's been. But like, let us revisit this. Damian Lillard had a great deal of power within the organization. He comes back, they give him the biggest contract he can possible, and he says on his introductory press conference, I plan on being me when I get back. That person is not a person who necessarily takes a back seat. And that is why in previous episodes, I was not necessarily like anti-Dame. I was anti-Damian Lillard's return this offseason because I thought it clouded the future of the franchise. They don't agree. And I'm not even asking you to agree. I am just merely explaining my personal take on why I believed like Dame was going to come back as the king in his kingdom. And I would say the early indicators are that he's the king in his kingdom. They've given him back the throne. He's obviously going to not play this year, and so many things can change. And I want to talk about that in a moment. But like, clearly my personal preferences, alignment, or whatever is not in line necessarily with the organization. But I want to mention two things here. In the past, Damian Lillard's frustration with the organization was not really about being here or not being competitive. It was when he was here and maybe like less competitive or not like pushing to be competitive on his terms. It happened first in 2021 and then again in 2023. The terms have indeed changed. Like the whole situation has changed, but the not on his terms was always the place where the beef between Dame and the Trailblazers, if it ever started, it always started there. Let's talk about those terms, and let's talk about the terms that have decidedly changed in the second segment. Join me there, won't ya? First, though, let's talk FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book, and we've got summer sports. Whether that's baseball, whether that's the WNBA, whether that's golf, whether that's high-stakes footy action, FanDuel is the best way to get in on the action for whatever event you are watching. You're already watching sports. Look, you're listening to Locked On Blazers. It's July. I bet you're a sports fan. So if you are watching baseball, if you are watching a little bit of golf, if you are watching footy here and abroad, if you are getting in on some WNBA action, well, FanDuel can help you add a little bit of new elements to your viewing experience. You can also track your favorite matchups, and if you use the FanDuel app, they keep it fresh with new daily promotions for fun ways to bet. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get a fast payout. So regular season games can get you paid even quicker, or whatever golf events you are indeed watching. Plus, you can place live same-game parlays. You can build elaborate bets before and during the action, or you can just watch a bet right out to the very end. And if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5, get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. So open the FanDuel app and visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right. So I mentioned that Damian Lillard's frustration with the Blazers when things weren't operating on his terms. It started first in 2021, where he very clearly considered asking for a trade. It was reported that he was about to, and then Damian Lillard kind of got mad at Henry Abbott, who reported that and said in a press conference right in front of all the microphones, that is not true, and I haven't decided what my future will be. He was under contract for 3 more seasons, and he just said, I haven't decided what my future will be. That is a man pondering a trade request. Like, don't get it twisted. He was frustrated because they weren't going all in the aggressive manner in which he wanted them to. And then in 2023, after not trading a draft pick in 2022, and then not trading that draft pick, that's the Shaden pick, and then not trading the draft pick in 2023, that's the Scoot pick, Dame eventually asked for a trade because they weren't dealing the assets they had for veterans to help him win right away. It was not about being in Portland. It was just about being in Portland outside of his terms. But the terms are different. They've always been part of the Damian Lillard drama. And when there has been drama, that's been it. There's the terms now that he is back are deeply, deeply, deeply different, right? Because there is an argument for Damian Lillard coming back. And when he does come back, he'll take a back seat because he'll be 36 years old. He'll be coming off an Achilles injury, and the Blazers he came back here to win. And he said the right things at his press conference about winning, about this being the perfect team, a team that fits him, a team that's young, that has depth, that plays the right way on both ends. And there is an argument to be made that when he comes back, because the terms have changed so mightily, his view will change. So all of those things I mentioned in the first segment about his role and status within the organization, and why he's kind of always he's had a bunch of power, and they gave him this big contract that like signifies that nothing has changed, and he believes he'll be Damian Lillard, blah blah. But like, the assumption about him taking a back seat is mostly one about time, right? Because based for my assumptions, I've kind of shared what I think the sort of status of Dame will be, and I don't think it'll largely change between now and October of 2026. But the counter argument would be like, there is so much stuff, Mike, you idiot, that happens between now and over the next 15 months before October. The argument is that the Blazers drafted Scoot Henderson and that he needs to be the focal point, and Damian Lillard will understand that because, of course, they've had a conversation with him, right? Of course, they've discussed it with both parties, and Dame gets it. That argument is also the assumption that Scoot will improve and that the Blazers are invested in him as the point guard of the future. And I would argue that we don't even know if Scoot Henderson is going to start this fall, much less in the fall in the future. So projecting that based on what we don't even know his role will be. But the argument here is that Scoot's going to be a lot better this season, and it's going to squash all of the speculation. And if anything, it's going to change the way we calculate it, because all of a sudden Scoot Henderson isn't going to be a theoretical youngster who's had some good moments and some really, really bad ones, but he's just going to be good. He's just going to be a good starting NBA point guard and one you want to commit to. And the dude they drafted third overall is going to be worth that third overall draft pick, the investment that implies, and also an investment going forward. I think the other argument here that's key is the Blazers found something at the end of last season. They played with length. They played with big defenders. They were a defense first team. They weren't a particularly good offensive team, but they were really good on defense, and they kind of leaned on that, and that's who they were. And that was the identity. And that new additions, be they Damian Lillard or whomever, are supposed to be additive parts of that strong base that's already established, fit into that strong base, as opposed to be people that say, okay, great idea, now you will mold it around me. And so I think, I kind of think that the counter argument to what I presented in the first segment is that so much is going to change. And I think I agree with that in and of itself. I think that while we don't know if Scoot or Jrue will start, or if they'll start next to each other and Shaedon Sharpe will move to the bench, I think we know who's going to start. Tumani and Denny are going to start, and Donovan Klingon's going to start. The other two starting spots, whether that is, I think it's two spots between four people. And that's for this coming season. Jeremy Grant, Jrue Holiday, Shaedon Sharpe, Scoot Henderson. Some combination of those four dudes are going to start in the other two remaining spots. They're really comfortable playing functionally Tumani Kamara at shooting guard. They did when they were their best last season, when they really took off and won. That was the lineup that they won with, was Jeremy, Tu, and Denny together. It wouldn't surprise me if that is a starting group coming out of training camp. I wouldn't guess right now. I would guess it's Jrue and Shaedon are your starters, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if Jeremy Grant's in the starting lineup. So I tend to agree with the take that between now and when this Damian Lillard situation comes up, it's going to be a totally different thing. My read is that even if things have changed, Damian Lillard will be treated a certain way and given a certain leeway, and also expects that type of role. And based on the way the organization has, based on his status with the organization, and my read that it largely will not change over the next 15 months, he will be given the starting point guard spot and get to just literally just be given it. So I think the other thing you're screaming here is Mike, he's 36, and it is very normal for 36-year-olds to come off the bench, you doofus. And I agree. I mentioned this with the Jrue Holiday thing, and Jrue is Dame's peer. They're basically the same age. Is that I thought it was one of the value of trading Jrue for Anthony Simons, just in and of itself, beyond the sort of basketball stuff, is that it's just more natural to play him in a reduced role because he doesn't have that standing with the team. He doesn't have that long-standing relationship, that history, that sort of political stuff that Simons would, right? It's it is weirder prioritizing a young point guard, Scoot Henderson, who's not quite as good as a 27-year-old in his physical prime, Anthony Simons, than it is prioritizing Scoot over a 35-year-old point guard who's better than Scoot. It's it's just different. It's a different thing. And so I agree. I buy that logic that it is very normal for guys in their mid-30s in the NBA to have reduced roles and for young players to play over them. I 100% agree. But Damian Lillard he's not normal, right? He's not normal here. He's not here in this city for this organization. He's not a 36-year-old guard. He's when he comes back in October, he's freaking Damian Lillard, and he just is. And I would point to a couple things. Actually, you know what? I do have some examples I want to point to, and I want to talk about what is the sort of, I view the best case scenario, because I think this argument is sound. And I think there are Mine isn't even an argument. It is a perspective that I happen to share, but I think there is a perspective that is counter to my perspective that is totally rational. And I want to offer some examples that are on both sides of that rationale. Join me in the third segment and we will do just that. Still a past first point guard. I'm still Mike Richmond, and you are still listening to Locked On Blazers. It's normal for dudes in their mid-30s to come off the bench in the NBA. It's normal for dudes in their mid-30s to get a reduced role behind young players. It would be very normal for the Blazers to say, Scoot Henderson's the point guard of the future. If he earns that role and is just straight up good in his third year, there is no reason that he would not be prioritized in year 4. I don't think you can play Scoot and Dame together too much just because of the size and because of the Blazers' identity as being a really good defensive team. So like that's a conversation for another day. You are choosing between one of them and playing them together sparingly unless like things drastically change. But I agree that often players in their 30s take reduced roles, but it isn't always the case, and it particularly isn't always the case for players of a certain status. Like Russell Westbrook really bristled at coming off the bench for the Lakers, and he was basically eventually traded and signed with a place with the Clippers initially where he would start, right? Like that was kind of the origin of the beef with Russ. It's like, you got to go to the bench, you just don't have it. He leaves, they trade him to Utah, he gets waived, signs with the Clippers, it gets a starting role. Like that was part of it. And then like, eventually didn't suit Russ. They moved to the bench. He adapted. He's adapted to a bench role with Denver last year, where he was pretty good until they had some injuries. And then he moved in the starting lineup. And again, like he played a bunch. But like, yeah, like it can take a while to adapt. It took Russell Westbrook kind of like a full change of scenery, miserableness to adapt. Chris Paul is maybe a bad example because he was still like, he wasn't coming off an injury the way Damian Lillard is. But like when he signed with the Spurs at 36 and 37, the Suns. The Spurs was the next team. At the Suns at 36 and 37, he was about to have an all NBA season. Like he's an all-time great player, and like he took them to the finals. Like he was the sort of catalyst for that team going from like, oh, pretty good to like incredible, right? So I don't think Paul at the same age is a great example, but a little bit later, when he signed with the Spurs, when he was 39 and was about to turn 40 that season, this most recent one that just happened. The reason Paul signed there in part was because there was an understanding that he would start, and that understanding continued until after they acquired De'Aaron Fox, and they started them together because of like respect for CP. He started all at 82. So players of a certain status often maintain that status. I think Carmelo Anthony is a name you could point to as a sort of a counter argument, but Melo was, when he kind of bristled in Oklahoma City at not starting when he first got there. And then they basically sent him home when he was going to play, when he just like was going to play a reduced role and not going to play. They just traded him and he got waived and was out of the league because he just straight up was not going to earn minutes in the rotation. It was going to be weird. And they kind of, they decided to go in another direction. And like, he was out of the NBA for 10 months, and then he came back with the Blazers and had this whole renewed perspective, and it was wonderful, and like the Blazers really needed him in that specific role, and so it worked out. And eventually Melo for in the final couple years of his career in Portland and with the Lakers did play a bench role, right? But he had to transition to it, and it was weird. I think the best version of the like franchise icon in their middle 30s comes back to the team and plays a reduced role is Dwayne Wade. If you are making the argument that this is a normal thing that could happen for Damian Lillard, and it could, I don't think it will, but it could. I think what you are pointing to is Dwayne Wade. He wants to get paid by Miami. They don't pay him. He leaves, ends up in Chicago. That's a mess. Who knew that playing for the Chicago Bulls in the 21st century would be a mess? He leaves, and then he ends up in Cleveland, and that doesn't work there. And then he eventually returns to Miami, and he's 37, and he was a sixth man, and they were a pretty mediocre team, and they were about to be incredible and have like one heck of a run over the next few years. But like that was the 2018-19 season. They were just like a mediocre basketball team. Dwayne Wade was a sixth man who rarely started, was mostly a bench player, coming back as a franchise icon in Wade County, in the place like where he's has a freaking statue, Yeah, I would say that is the example of it. And that was a player who, again, like tried to go to greener pastures, returned. I think Dwayne Wade, if you're looking for, hey, this happens, that's a really good example. That's a strong example. So where are we here? One, I think it's too early to worry about it. I really do. As I said at the top of the show, it's just so far away. But I think there is a world, in a perfect world, Scoot Henderson is really, really good this season and makes it complicated. And Damian Lillard both sees and accepts that. And he settles into either a starting role, but he plays fewer minutes, or a six-man type of role. And he occasionally conjures up the magic of being Damian Lillard, and the Blazers are pretty darn good. But again, like we don't even know if Scoot's going to start this season. So projecting him to start the following season is already a little bit murky. And I think there's a couple things at play here. One, I think Dame's status is just different. I think Dame's status in Portland is just different than these other guys, although Dwayne Wade is a pretty good example. But I think there's a really good outcome, is that like this is a huge problem. Let me expand on what I mean by that, because if Scoot rocks, and Jrue Holiday had, a down year in Boston last year, but he rocks too, right? And he's like clearly healthy and ready to go. And Shaedon Sharpe rocks, and you need to play all those dudes. I think you get into, and Damian Lillard comes back healthy, right? A big part of this assumption is that Damian Lillard comes back and is like able to play basketball. But my assumption here is that like he will be able to play some level of basketball, and the Blazers will give him a role that is like Damian Lillard franchise icon, and then slowly they will identify like what his capabilities are. That might not be how it plays out, but that is my assumption, is kind of what I was a little bit worried about with the sort of idea of signing him in general. Clearly the Blazers don't view it the way I do it. I think if everybody can hoop, right? If Dame's ready and looks pretty darn special coming off this Achilles injury, if Jrue is not yet like gray, right, and he still is a high level player and can play like fewer minutes because he's 36, yada yada yada, and Scoot's really good and Shade's really good, if everybody's good at basketball, you can solve it via trade. You can just solve it via trade, right? Like somebody can get traded and you can solve it via trade. It would be weird to have Scoot be the guy you choose to trade if he's really good over the 36-year-old point guard, but like you can solve it via trade if everyone's good. I do think if it is, there is a challenging scenario where Scoot doesn't take this step forward as much, and that it is murkier because Damian Lillard's not quite Dame and Scoot's not quite ready, and you get caught in this sort of no man's land where it's like, well, is it too early to totally punt on the Scoot experience, or it'll just be his fourth season and like he'll just be under contract, right? He'll just like they won't have to make that decision. At least they'll have a full year of playing out like kind of what it looks like. And if Scoot is incapable of like beating out 36-year-old Damian Lillard coming off his Achilles injury, that gets a little bit rougher. I think the best case like scenario in terms of basketball stuff is that like Scoot is clearly better, but like there is this weird hierarchy thing in terms of like role within the organization, and like that gets settled by virtue of like you hope that Chauncey Billups, player whisperer, can settle it. Dame as a bench veteran, like true bench veteran, or Dame as a starter, like the most likely scenario is somewhere in the middle, right? Where he's not Damian Lillard of yore, but he's a good basketball player. And Scoot Henderson isn't like a budding all-star and like clearly really, really good, but like capable of playing and deserves starting minutes. And that like there's somewhere in the middle. Like obviously we kind of look at it now as like binary options. Either Scoot starts and Dame comes off the bench, or Dame starts and Scoot's in trouble and he's off the bench and like and out of the organization, and it's like a vote of no confidence even by signing Dame. Like I do think it clouds Scoot Henderson's future that the team added 2 35-year-old guards this offseason. No doubt about it. You need depth, you need talent, but like also it's just like it is not exactly like a, hey, we already have our point guard type of decision-making, right? It's, we hope we do, but we might not type of decision-making. There's just so many things that can happen between now and October 2026 that the most likely scenario is somewhere between the middle of those two obvious binary options. Like the gray middle is where this ends over the next 15 months. And that will probably, like so much of what plays out this season will inform how we feel about it. So where do I land? I still think the signing of Damian Lillard puts a cloud over some of the decision making moving forward. But I think this season allows them enough of a runway to figure out what they've got, who has it, who needs to play, what is Scoot Henderson, what is Shaedon Sharpe, and how much does Jrue have. And so much of that, what plays out this year, will allow them to either have really tough decisions or relatively easy ones. But I maintain my guess is that Damian Lillard will be treated like franchise icon Damian Lillard when he returns to the court and will be given a role that is commensurate with being Damian Lillard and less so commensurate with being a 36-year-old coming off an Achilles injury. That's just my guess. We're a long way off. Those are my many thoughts. This was something that I think a lot of listeners have been worrying about. And even though I just spent a half hour talking about it, my actual advice is don't worry. I had a long conversation with a friend last night about this, where it's just like, this is indeed maybe a big picture. I don't know, problem's not the right word, but it clouds sort of the big picture thinking with the Blazers because there's so many unknowns, and there's unknowns from a variety of directions for the young players, for the old players, for everybody. But like this particular upcoming season is a season that will hopefully provide clarity as opposed to make things murkier. And I think if you get a certain level of clarity, the how Dame fits in the decision gets easier. So in July, I am where I am. But when we revisit this next spring, and we'll probably talk about it throughout the year to some extent, although not nearly at this length. This is the only time we're really going to talk about it at length. When we talk about it in the future, I think we will have just so much more data on what this looks like. So whether you are extremely mad that I think a certain way or right on board with me, my advice here is that we got a lot of time to figure out what the actual truth is, and the truth is usually in the middle. That is going to do it for today's show. Come back for tomorrow's show, 5 days a week, wherever you get podcasts, also on YouTube. Tell your friends about the program. I appreciate you listening. I'll talk to you soon.